Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So, I said I may have spent I was gonna think about spending, yesterday redoing my macro to try to get it to work better. I kind of quickly looked into it, and like the way I have things implemented makes it pretty much impossible to do what I was trying to do, so I quickly abandoned that and instead played Inside from Playdead Games, and the spiritual successor to Limbo, and managed to play all the way through it, making close to 30-minute episodes for the most part, which is something I definitely need to get back to. And yeah, I would say Inside is about the most creatively bankrupt game I've seen in a very long time, if ever. It's a new month, so I made it to Platinum, and then I stopped playing off screen on Yu Gi Oh! So I should now be at Gold. Um, uh, but yeah, there's just not really a concept there that makes a lot of sense as far as Inside. It really is just ripping off Limbo and added a little bit of color for the first couple of chapters at least, and then later on it introduces some puzzles and some concepts that are slightly different than Limbo. It kind of expands on those concepts, but it doesn't connect it in any way. Like they desperately needed to spell out what the story was that they're even trying to say, because the best I can figure, at the end of the game, this boy character you've been playing as gets absorbed by a Cronenberg-esque pile of flesh, and then you play as the Cronenberg-esque pile of flesh to escape, and you escape but die at the end. Like, that seems to be just the end of it. Like, you don't quite make it to the ocean, which is where you seem to be going. Um, and it seems to be the idea that Cronenberg-esque pile of flesh was in the mind of the boy character you were playing since the beginning of the game. So you, as the player, were controlling a Cronenberg-esque monster that was controlling a boy. And at times the boy was also controlling these mindless creatures that I was calling them marionettes because they look like marionette puppets, but whatever. But it seems like they really just cut and pasted a couple ideas, because there are things that just don't make sense no matter what. Because halfway through the game you start seeing these drowned little girls. Like, they're not drowned, they're more like mermaids, but they try to drown you in the water. Half the game you spend swimming. In the first half of the game you spend swimming, drowning if you go too deep or stay underwater too long. And then at a certain point in the middle of the narrative, the boy character you're playing as gets caught by one of the mermaid characters and pulled down to the point where he drowns. But he doesn't drown. He realizes then that he can swim infinitely and just breathe underwater, or doesn't need to breathe, which would maybe imply that the boy is part of the monster or some other kind of monster. It would also imply that the only reason he was drowning up until that point is because he was just holding his breath and suffocating himself while underwater. Or that he just magically gained the ability to breathe underwater. Clearly the mermaids can breathe underwater, so you would almost assume that it was the boy that was the monster, and he was absorbing abilities eventually by touching or being near other people. And that kind of makes sense, because early in the game you have to use this like electric device to mind control people, the mindless, but then you don't need the helmet and the mind control device to control the people. So yeah, the whole thing doesn't logically make sense. There's also parasites that are introduced early and then forgotten about. So, like, you see these parasites infecting pigs, and you see a bunch of dead pigs, and the story doesn't really resolve any of that. There's not a single word of dialogue in the entire game. It's all just visual storytelling. And if you are going to do visual storytelling, then there needs to be a lot more effort put into it. And yeah, undoubtedly, Limbo was subtle. But Limbo was also a shorter game. The collectibles maybe a little bit more harder to get in Limbo than in Inside. Particularly if you've just played a game. Almost certainly anybody that plays Inside will play the game all the way through, then look at a walkthrough and use the chapter select after you've beaten the game to get the collectibles, get all the achievements, and then see the alternate ending if they want to see it. The alternate ending is in no way any better than the regular ending. It's just like, oh, well, the boy dies in one, and then the blob dies in the other, and logically it would seem like both would probably end up being dead in both scenarios. There is this whole, like, fascist controlling military guard implication in the game that goes nowhere, and the guards literally just disappear halfway through the game. Undoubtedly, it was like 4 or 5 different people making 4 or 5 different games, so that all just got added together in last place. And the game is incredibly dark visually too, so it's fairly ugly because of that factor. But yeah, the guards don't mean anything. They just disappear and stop showing up, even though there are humans. And there's even some plot line that would be implied in that there's a guard that's holding a child's hand in the background of a couple different scenes, which makes him seem like he might be a leader, or that this child creature might be mentally controlling other mindless. But they just don't touch upon it. You just see that, and it's just like, oh, well, there's this odd thing, but it's just kind of odd. And I assume it's a child. It's just a shorter character. But the Inside is really not a game that has like Easter eggs and you have to dig deep to find the answer. It's really just a nothing burger. It's so obviously the fact that it's so obvious that they were in 2016, 5 years away from the release of Limbo, and they hadn't done anything else. Limbo was a critical success, but Limbo clones really don't exist because you can't really make another Limbo. Like they did that gimmick once, and with that one gimmick there was no more tricks they could pull off. So yeah, they basically are just were hoping that that would get lucky a second time, and that they'd get lucky a second time, where honestly they should have just not bothered to make another game. And I guess since it's 2022 now and their last game is 2016, they probably are done making games as a business. It really does highlight, though, how if you're a critical darling and a pretty good success, even sales-wise, as an indie company, that doesn't inherently mean that you'll be able to create your next game. The Binding of Isaac creator, for the most part, trapped around just making more Binding of Isaac, and that game being a roguelike that works, where the Limbo creators, I guess, feeling trapped that they have to make a new Limbo game, not really being able to improve upon the experience of Limbo, which was an experience that certainly required it to be fairly short, and it got extremely lucky in the fact that there's I think Limbo was given away for free, part of the summer code, or it was promoted during the Xbox summer code, or was given away during the Xbox Game Pass. It's definitely been given away a lot, and that has gotten it in front of a lot more people than it normally would have. Excuse me. But yeah. They got incredibly lucky there, and they should have tried to do something different. Moving from the left to the right as a gameplay mechanic can't be your only major actions. If they had consistently had a single type of puzzle in Inside, I would have definitely appreciated it a lot more instead of jumping around to several different puzzles. There's a point at the end of the game where you're effectively just burning a companion cube, and it's so obviously influenced by Portal 2. It's ridiculous. But yeah, it felt like what Inside was trying to do was make you ask yourself the question and make the moral determination: is it acceptable to use another sentient being for your own life and liberty and thriving? Because at the very beginning there's like a puzzle where you get a baby chicken sucked up into a machine, and it flies across the air and hits a hay bale and knocks the hay bale down and kills the chicken. So it starts very simplistically, like, is it acceptable for you to use or manipulate a chicken to move forward in the game? And then later in the game you have the mindless, and you're controlling them, and they are just these beasts of burden laborers. Although the mindless later on in the game stop being so mindless, they start off not even being able to move or walk in any way, and then later on you see that they're doing full-on like janitorial work where it seems like there's nothing controlling them, and they're being marched around and walking in line. So the mindless do seem to have some way in which they are trained or controlled. But yeah, that's just yet another inconsistency as it goes. I guess if you get all the extras, the assumption is that the big blob of flesh is an alien, and that the government is using the alien to control the mindless. But then a real question is where the mindless came from in the first place. Like there definitely is a way in which you tell this story, and it makes sense. But they didn't bother to tell it that way. But yeah, it definitely came off feeling like you were going to make that decision at the end of the game, where the boy would have been given two endings very at the last decision point. Does the boy character that you're playing as sacrifice his whole life to free the mindless, or does he sacrifice all the mindless people to free the boy? And you would have to make that decision, that increasingly difficult decision as to, well, if these mindless are mindless and don't have any sentience, is it necessary or important to prioritize their life over the boys? But that doesn't happen. There's basically nothing like that happens. In a lot of ways, the best way you could explain the story is that the controlling government agency is probably just like SCP, and that they have a collection of different kinds of monsters. And while 2016 would have been before the game Control came out and made an SCP game, it wouldn't be the first time though that SCP has knowingly been in existence. Because the SCP website has existed this whole time. Anyways, I don't want to really rehash my disappointment with Inside much more. In part as recording, I once again had the OBS / advanced scene switcher micro stuttering issue. This still very much does not feel like it is the same issue as the trusted platform module issue. My computer's not just full on powering off, it's just locking up, and I'm getting logs that definitely point to it. Some of this might be the NVIDIA video drivers as an issue too, but I don't think it's that. So I opted to try to do as fresh of an install in OBS as possible, get rid of a lot of plugins, get rid of a lot of experimental scenes that have potentially music playing in a loop or videos playing in a loop. Make sure all of that unloads so it is as lightweight and efficient as possible, although really shouldn't have to do that, but whatever. So I got rid of like the censored beep gimmick because I'm never gonna really use that. It's funny that you could potentially beep yourself in a live stream, but in actuality, it was always going to be done jokingly, and I'm so anti-censorship that even censoring yourself and what you're saying should not happen with the process of using a beep. If you're going to restrain yourself and not say something, you should restrain yourself and not say it. You don't have a beep following you around in real life. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that fixed it. I doubt it. I'm still running an older version of OBS, but there is an argument to install an even older version of OBS. Of course, there might also be an argument to just straight up install the newest version of OBS. My hope is that a new version my hope is that a new version of OBS will come out and it will fix whatever problem there is, or this fresh install will fix this problem, and then I can start updating, because I want to be on the latest stable version of OBS. I don't want to be on something that's a year old, although it does kind of make sense to just find something that works and stick with it and not update particularly if there's not any new features that you want. Like, I think this is something that happens in every gadget file's life, is that eventually they don't have as much free time or energy to want the latest version of operating systems or software just because. Now, I am trying to be somewhat cutting edge as a YouTube content creator as far as at least my technical ability. I'm probably not cutting edge in any other aspect. So having the new software would kind of make sense, but not at the expense of actively being able to record content. Like, I've recorded 2 series now, and in both series there's been a lockup of some sort. Although inside the lockup happened after I stopped recording. I tried to open a log, so the recording was fine. It was just a little micro stutter, but every recording now for practically a year is going to have computer complaints around it, and that's just not how computers should be worked. Like, arguably I should have a development install of OBS and try anything in development, and then there should be some way to try and review, like code review, that development install of OBS to make sure it works, and then a production version that is rock solid. And it should be a big hassle of code review to move a development version to a production version, but that does not work on an individual basis. That's a process you would do in a corporation, where you have other people that can actually review the code or test OBS in this instance. The only way to get enough proper testing would be to use the development version, so you're constantly at the development version. I still don't think Windows is 100% blameless either. Like, this really is making more of an argument for going back to just console gaming. But unfortunately, even console games are not guaranteed to be bug-free these days. So there really isn't any solution. Let's see if we can pull this off. Undoubtedly there will be a new announcement for a festival in Yu-Gi-Oh! And then that'll be a thing. I had a nightmare of a time trying to get a Apple TV set up on my Roku TV. I've never really had an Apple ID, except for I installed iTunes to use OBS, to use like the Apple audio encoding, just to see if that was something I wanted to do. And so I made an Apple ID at that point, and then trying to log into that Apple ID, it was, I guess, before they set up their two-factor authentication, which is still very bad because it is all through text messaging. There seems to be no way to set up an authenticator app. Maybe there is. As far as two-factor, authenticator apps are way better than two-factor, in my opinion. But then to get Apple TV set up, I had to make a new account, and in making a new account, I had to I had to sign into and create a new iCloud account, and then I had to sign and set up a new iTunes account. So there's like 3 different accounts that Apple is just pretending like every single person wants those things, even though I don't even know for Apple TV why I would need an iCloud account and an iTunes account and an Apple ID. It seems like at least one of those, if not 2 of those, are redundant. Particularly when I don't have any Apple products, so I'm having to install iTunes on Windows and to make an iTunes account, because that's the only way you can do it. Why can I not special summon things? Once per turn. Alright. So, and even throughout the process of setting all of that up, every time you have to log into something, you're getting a text message through for the second factor. So halfway through the process, as it's telling me, no, you have to do this, no, you have to do this, I'm logging into things 2 or 3 times, and every single time it wants that second factor. It's not even giving a 2-minute window. And so I get to the point where I'm about to make an iTunes account and log in, and it goes too many authentication attempts or too many 2 factors, come back later. So it literally took me 24 hours to be able to sign into an Apple TV account. And after all that hassle, I look at Apple TV and there's barely a selection there. It's nowhere as good as Netflix or Amazon Prime, and saying it's nowhere as good as Amazon Prime is terrible. It's incredibly limited in its original content. Seems to have no anime at all, intentionally, I guess. It doesn't seem like it has that much kid content otherwise, because most anime is not kid content, in unfairness. But you would think if you're going to say we specifically are going to exclude anime and go family friendly, at least a little bit, we would then go heavy into family friendliness with kid content. It does seem like you could buy and rent movies through iTunes, and you might have slightly better or faster selections to the big blockbuster movies, but you're buying and renting them on top of that, and I'm not sure that Prime Video doesn't offer the same things, really. I think Prime Video and Hulu both probably integrate the other streaming services fairly well. It does definitely make Netflix still stand out in the fact that whether you like the Netflix originals or not, Netflix has a lot more originals. And Netflix definitely has a lot more weird Korean shows. And all I wanted to do was watch a TV show called Severance on Amazon Prime. On Apple Plus, and because that's the only place you can see it. And boy, was that a hassle. Okay, we got 2, so if we do this, might be able to win here. But yeah, just a total nightmare. I've never had such a horrible experience. And yeah, that certainly shows like the walled garden approach and this kind of stupidity around oh, I could have canceled that. The stupidity around how Apple does things. And I guess that's a nice little reminder that I would never deal with Apple products. I'll take buggy, poorly thought out Android products any day. Which Samsung did just announce a 3mm process in their chips, beating TSMC's 4mm process. A long story short, that means the chips will be better, more powerful, efficient, cooler, probably capable of being a little bit smaller for the same amount of impact. Um, I don't think that's gonna work because I think this was the thing that activated its ability. Yep. So I've just lost. I watched the movie Oculus. I had watched it before, but honestly, both times I've watched the movie Oculus, I've gotten a little bit bored and fast forward through it. I think there is, even though I really did like the movie, even though most people didn't, which is surprising, but not super surprising. Most people that review and like horror movies tend to like more of the dumb fun horror movies, and they tend to hate the actually scary ones or deep thoughtful ones, as it were. And horror movies in general just don't get very well reviewed. But yeah, I think there is a problem with the pacing in that it is rising action, rising action, rising action, and instead of having some falling action, at some points it jumps from showing what's happening in the present time to what's happening in the past, which is just more rising action, and that ironically leads to the viewer, or me in this case at least, getting a little bit bored, because it just does not let up or change. It probably also suffers in part by taking place pretty much in one house the whole time. If there was a different location and different scene, that would have happened. It probably would have helped, since the narrative is that one sibling believes the mirror is evil and haunted, which halfway through the movie they prove that to be true, and one sibling believes that he was just crazy, and he's had psychotherapy to realize that. It would probably make a lot of sense if there was B scenes of the sibling being in a psychiatric ward, being in a therapist's office. It would be an interesting twist, frankly, halfway through it, if it is revealed that the memories we're being shown of him being in the therapist's office are actually just delusions or misrepresentations made by the evil mirror. There's a point kind of at the end of Oculus where it's trying to almost do like a 13 Ghost thing, where everything that is killed or absorbed by the mirror gets used and turned into a ghost, but you don't get any real hint as to where the mirror actually came from, which you could have made a sequel to the movie and done that. But what's really weird about Oculus, and this has nothing to do with video games, and we need to be talking about video game news. Because I apparently got like less interested than I thought I was getting. That was wrong on this end, wasn't it? I had forgotten what the actual ending of the story was, because I definitely had some vague thought that they succeeded and defeated the mirror, and nope, that is definitely not what happens. And maybe that's because the ending is not so impactful that when in watching it for the second time in the past probably 5 years, maybe even 10 years, it hasn't been that long. That might explain why I didn't remember the ending. Which I bet there's probably a lot of movies that I vaguely recall having seen, but actually don't really remember the ending of. Which, that wouldn't be super surprising either. I could have destroyed this and then activated this ability to banish that card, but I think we'll play it somewhat safe and do it this way to start with. Although I don't think that is actually safer. Let's see. I am slowly getting back into the habit of making pre-recorded videos, and I definitely do need to record more pre-recorded videos and schedule for release more pre-recorded videos. I'm fairly safe into August, but that's about it. See, having the ability to do this once per turn doesn't really strike me as useful to drag it out like that. Eventually, if he summons enough of these, I can special summon this and sacrifice those. Of course, that gives him a super powerful character. The only reason you want to pull that off is so that next turn I can summon this in attack position, use its ability, and summon our main strong guy and banish the card. But his whole strategy here is some kind of trained strategy of quick summoning things. I am a little shocked today that we're not having network troubles. So, yeah, I don't know if maybe there was something that a fresh install did to fix that also. Yeah, I don't know. So maybe I fixed even more things than I thought I did. Of course, it's definitely hoping a lot. Certainly. THQ Nordic has a limited sale as far as video game news. 15,000 pieces for Death's Mask replica. I feel like they had a mold for this, and it came in the limited edition version of Darksiders 2 when it was released, and they either made another run for some insane reason, or more likely they had a bunch in a warehouse somewhere, and they were tired of paying for storage for them. 15,000 is not a lot. It is almost certainly the case that there are warehouses full of toys and things that were made and sold decades ago, just because companies do crazy things. Right. If I summon that wouldn't do anything. I mean, you can definitely summon that, but it's not the right move. So I think what you have to do here is just attack here. Doesn't seem like there's quite a way to win this turn. It didn't let me activate Max C. Let's activate Max C now. Okay, what can we add to our hand? I guess we add that one. And then, yeah, add this to the hand too. Set this down like it's a trap and end the turn. A YouTuber named Technoblade, who was apparently a Minecraft YouTuber, died. Apparently he had a long battle with cancer. I have never heard of him. I'm not that deep into watching Minecraft players. I mostly only watch Minecrackers, people on Minecrack. Or is it Minecraft that I even watch anymore? I watched them for a while, but I might be thinking of a different group. But yeah, there's basically only one group in Captain Sparkles on occasion that I watch as far as Minecraft. We can also see Minecraft is not immediately changing their icon with the pride colors. Although you almost assume that they will eventually get to that point where they do change it. If rainbow economics is a phrase I've heard, really was the devout belief of those companies, they would potentially just always have a pride flag somewhere. Maybe not as their icon though. But yeah, with a new month. Although July, with the 4th of July and the United States independence, is going to be a hard month to catch anybody. I don't think too many people are going to be very patriotic as far as the more left liberal leaning companies. And I don't know what other big events happen in July that you would change your icon to. Somebody, I don't remember who, linked to this "Can I Play That" article, which is a cognitive accessibility guide. So they're making suggestions for like on-off settings for flickering images and flashing lights, which makes sense. On-off settings for motion blur, head bump, head bobbing, and depth of field. Easy access to short, clear instructions about what the player should be doing. If the objection has been given in character, summarize it somewhere the player can easily get to. For example, in their heads-up display, on the pause screen, or in a quest journal. Honestly, that's a great suggestion. All these are very practical, good suggestions in a world where we hear a lot of talk about accessibility and it not being anything about accessibility. Easy to follow navigational directions, glowing breadcrumb trails minimap on a heads-up display, 3D directional areas, letting players be able to see the controls be able to see what the controls do at any point. Player with memory problems or can easily be confused may forget which button controls which maneuvers. I've definitely had that in certain points, and I don't think I really have any cognitive disability, but there definitely are points where you, in games, 5 hours later, there was a button that did something and you were able to play the whole game without actually doing that thing, and then all of a sudden you have a puzzle that requires that. Allowing players to replay tutorials or reread instructions at any point. Some games with in-game kind of tutorials, it would be kind of hard to do that, but it's not a terrible thought because inherently a lot of games have tutorial sections at the beginning where you're figuring out how everything works. Inside had that where you had to just push all the buttons to find the jump button to get past a ledge, and if you didn't, you were just stuck. It's a bad system, certainly, but if you were to make that its own separate bespoke tutorial section, and at any point you could reload that section and play it again, that would be fairly awkward and game immersion breaking. Like, really, there is kind of a need for two tutorials, a separate tutorial and an in-game tutorial, and maybe, and a lot of times you don't need that separate tutorial. I've rarely seen games do that, but I've seen it before. When presenting information in text, use a font that's easy to read. Yes. If your game is text heavy, offer players a choice of specifically dyslexia-friendly fonts, such as Open Dyslexia. Now, this is one I'm going to disagree with. From what I've heard, the font Open Dyslexia and practically all the dyslexia-friendly fonts are not preferred by people with dyslexia, and people with dyslexia report it to be not that helpful. Most people just want Arial as the font, or maybe Times New Roman. I think it is just a sans serif font is mostly what they're looking for. And because of the fact that since people with dyslexia are going to have to look at other people's computers and other people's phones, it's not really worth it to have a custom font or try to learn from a custom font that is very difficult, if not impossible, to install. Like, very few people know how to install a font into Android. I'm not even sure you really can. I'm not sure if you can install fonts in Apple iOS phones. very few people are going to go through the effort to install fonts in on Windows even. So it's much better to just learn and stick with a regular font. There's a difference certainly between highly stylized fonts and fonts people see every day. Let the player read at their own pace, presenting text prompts and written dialogues. Pause other gameplay so they have as much time as they need to read and process information. That's pretty much always should be true. There definitely have been times where written dialogue has popped up and then there is no pause as you're reading the written dialogue, and then even in the same game text has popped up and there is a pause there. Ni no Kuni was kind of bad about that. I definitely have seen it in some of the other games I've played recently where like 80% of the time you get a pause and then every now and then you don't get a pause. Independent sliders for music, sound effects, and dialogue. Definitely makes sense. And a lot of these are... You can sell a lot of these features as accessibility issues, and for people with cognitive impairment, they would be accessibility issues, but they're also just great features to have in every game anyways. Everybody benefits from this, which is, it's always nice when that is the case, where helping the minority actually improves the lives of everyone. Yeah. And it's nice when that is fairly obvious. Of course, all of this really just makes an argument for having these be standards required by Microsoft and Nintendo and PlayStation through an advanced programmable interface. So you set these settings once and have to follow these standards. All games have to follow and integrate these standards. Make your user interface simple and uncluttered. Well, that is probably the truth for cognitive impairment things. There is going to be a certain line where the artist wants to make a cluttered and complex user interface as part of the game, and I would have to side with the artist's desire in that case. Not all art is for everybody. That is fairly obvious. There's like thousands of Rule 34 pieces of art that I'd still call art online. That doesn't mean everybody has to engage with or enjoy Rule 34 art, or just nudes in general. There's thousands of nudes online that are artistically done and aren't just pornographic. That doesn't mean it's for everybody. So, yeah. But compared to most articles, I'm agreeing with most of this. Let players control how much visual information they see at once in the user interface. For example, on a map covered in icons, let the player toggle the legend on and off, select some icons. Again, very, very logical suggestions. Of course, an article like this doesn't really do anything. I mean, this is just somebody wrote an article somewhere. And apparently this was written in 2019, and they're just relinking to it. As for an actual website, can I play that? Well, I've got to set up now where every time I click on something, it opens in a new tab. We could get into who is this person, freelance game writer and self-described Velcro cyborg. I don't even know what that means. Suffice it to say, though, it is much more agreeable as far as a list of things to focus on. Yeah. I guess there's a games codex here that specifically, it is a specific website that gives out articles around the idea of accessibility. So if you very much had accessibility issues, Can I Play That might be a website for you. Should I integrate it as a news source? Not really. It would drive me batty, certainly, to have to talk about accessibility every live stream. It drives me batty even more. But it does seem like they have kind of mini deep dives in case you really needed to check what a menu looks like. I could see a very caring, helpful parent checking this also for a kid or a child, maybe even an adult child, to figure out what games are working for it. There is a kind of random scale, I would say, though, as far as inability to an inability to actually play some games. Most people that have enough cognitive ability to engage in any kind of video game at all tend to be more on the side of being able to play most games, or at least get 80% of the way through most games. They don't tend to be so bad off that they can't play the vast majority of games. Video games, I think, are nowhere as inaccessible as other activities. Like, certainly plenty of like rock climbing and even like playing arcade games and pinballs and things like that. Those are way less accessible to people. And there's been so much effort because it's easy to make specialty controllers for people to adapt for all of that they've really solved that. And there's such a focus on having video games in hospitals for kids with special disabilities that there's been a lot of effort put into that. And so, yeah, it's definitely overemphasized, perhaps because it is one of the few activities people can engage with, people with disabilities can engage with, but it is awkward, to say the least, to see just how much it gets talked about. And it's only slightly tinfoil hat, and yet at this point I don't know if it's even worth saying anything is tinfoil hat as far as a conspiracy theory. But it's only slightly crazy to suggest that there definitely is some percentage, a strong enough percentage of people who push accessibility in video games to make it seem like it's a bigger deal. Those would probably be the organizations that are charities that are getting donations. They are pushing the narrative that accessibility is a big deal in video games and getting donations for that. And just individuals like those charities. And so they push it to be such a big deal that it gets overemphasized, and then there is some percentage of people that's big enough that may not be the same group of people even that are now using the fact that accessibility is looked on as a bigger deal than it really should be, as a way to then push a narrative of other things being accessibility issues when they really aren't. Like, video game critics, mainstream video game journalists in particular, often push the fact that some games are hard as being accessibility issues, just because the game is generically difficult. Which, that was never in line with what people were meaning when they were saying accessibility issues. Like, there was definitely tons of shifting of the narrative and pretending like words mean one thing when they mean a different thing. Like, I definitely am still very much on the side where I believe even if you made a game 100% accessible for all people with all kinds of disabilities, the game still should be potentially hard and potentially too hard for some people, whether they have disabilities or not. We can't dumb down games to the point where they stop being a challenge and stop being fun, and video game critics don't want to admit that or realize that. Moving on, I'm still keeping an eye on Spicy Horse games on Steam. It still seems like every single game except for Alice Madness Returns has not been relisted. Unless... Nope. Nothing there. Yeah. So, we know that EA has, or Ubisoft, I don't remember which one, I think it's EA, has kind of the publishing rights to Alice Madness Returns. So, it almost feels like maybe Spicy Horse did intentionally, and they're just straight up lying, remove all of their games from sale on Steam. Or Steam is just incredibly that bad about relisting those other games. Yeah, it does seem like some kind of weird something or other is happening. And we still have yet to actually see a live stream happen between American McGee and his co-worker, who were live streaming pretty much once a week or so. So yeah, again, it would be very tinfoil hat to assume that there's something going on there, but there does seem like there's some weirdness going on here. And the only thing they are getting promoted on his Twitter, which we're assuming that he has actual control of his Twitter, is Spicy Horse still selling the stuffed rabbit toys from Spicy Horse. Yeah. So yeah, I still really have no idea what is going on there, and we won't probably ever really know what's going on until he starts streaming again, or the games get returned to Steam. Either one of those could happen. Alright. This is going to take forever, like usual. And then the question is going to come down to should we destroy ourselves, or should we destroy that card? I think we have to destroy ourselves. So we can then activate this, so that we can then banish this. And I guess that was in the wrong position, and that's why I couldn't summon it before that point. Because this guy has to be summoned in this zone, or a zone being pointed by another one of these. Hit that. Hit that. And end of turn. Let's see. We have a game that came out on Steam. Some of these I was working on them on my macro, so these are going to be out of order. Thrill Penguin here on Steam doesn't look that interesting. Need to hurry up as usual. We have a game called Downfall that just looks like an asset flip game. I like this visual, but it doesn't really connect to anything else. Here we have what looks like a Chinese puzzle game, maybe with some cooking mechanics. Doesn't really matter. Should have probably canceled that. See if that kills it. I could still win here, but I could also fail miserably. We have a game here called Galaxy Tales Story of Rapunzel, which came out June 29th, and it's already on the follow list. So we'll leave that there and see if there's better response. Here we have a game called Clown for Speed, which looks like nothing. And we have a game called Zombie Groove, which looks like nothing. Add this to the hand. Yeah, that's what I need as a backup. So my hope here is that I can activate this effect, summon my other guy, banish this card and destroy his strategy. And so now my hope would be that he would just surrender completely at that point. I should have summoned that over there. There we go. Video Games Chronicle has an article here. Here's the first image of a PlayStation VR 2 in the wild, which, okay. It's a VR headset. It's not doing anything crazy there. It's got the don't bash your hands into the wall guards around the controllers, which that's nothing here. Seems like there's a very long cord included. That means something is corded, probably the headset directly to the PlayStation 5, uh, at least at the moment. Nothing really surprising there, though. I do think at some point we will start to think of consoles as more base stations for VR headsets, if that starts to really make sense. It's not too much of a logical step to go from a Switch which you're holding in your hands in front of your face to a Switch that is connected to a headset and then the Joy-Cons are disconnected and being used. The problem with it, though, is I think you're going to have to approach VR, if you're ever going to make it successful, with legacy in mind a lot more. You're going to have to say, we're going to focus 60-70% of our effort to make sure flat 1080p 4K 2K video games that are just square look and play great in VR, even if it just feels like you're in a theater looking at a flat screen playing video games. That's where they need to focus, because there needs to be a level of better sales pitch, I guess is what you'd call it, where you can make the claim it can play all of your old games and it will make your old games better, that it is really worth wearing the headset for that. We have a game on Steam here called I Deserve a Happy Ending, which looks like it's a LGBT plus visual novel. A dirty pun in the title that is kind of easy to overlook. I guess you could put this on the fall list, but really, I guess there's not much of a reason. I guess I'll put it on the fall list and just see if people respond to it. I feel like I might be going slightly too critical if I'm not careful here. Yeah, it does feel like there's just too high of a chance that I'm going to start eliminating all visual novels. Okay. Got a victory finally. But we definitely are at a point where a lot of people who were in Platinum have been dropped down to Gold in Season 1. So the competition is stiffer on day 1 than it is on the last day of the month. GameDeveloper.com has an article. Niantic laid off 8% of its staff and canceled some upcoming games. We had already really talked about this, but I figure it's worth saying a second time. And that should be the point where my macro was run earlier, so we should now be more into a traditional order of just Video Games Chronicle articles first. The God of War director asks fans for patience amid speculation of imminent Ragnarok news. Also, I saw that this person certainly is pushing a narrative that game players just need to be nicer to game developers in general. And I mean, what world do they think they are living in, that where anybody on the internet is going to be nice to anybody, particularly a rabid fan base that you built yourself through your own actions, through teaser trailers and E3s. Like, video game players are hyped around sequels because your game is good. You should be happy about that. But they are also hyped because publishers, in particular, have built up a culture of hype that they should have never done. So really, this is more of an issue of there being a culture of hype in video games more than most products, and now developers are being, I don't want to say whiny little babies, but they're often come off as whiny little babies when people are excited about your games. And let's not beat around the bush. The phrase liberal snowflake exists for a reason. There is a lot of snowflake people on both sides, liberal and conservative, that can dish it out just fine, but then they absolutely are unwilling to take any criticism, and they don't ever take any criticism in earnest. They just assume it's somebody trolling them or being mean to them. At a certain level, there is probably a very narrow path as far as the right way to engage with the internet. I see Andrew Murphy is on the chat saying yo, so I'll say yo back. Hey, Andrew Murphy. But yeah, you have to start from the beginning knowing that it's going to be very thick-skinned. You have to kind of come from the perspective that if you're on the internet, you're effectively like a comedian, like a East Coast New York type comedian that's gonna sit around with your friends and insult each other and be insulted, and you're gonna get heckled, and you're going to just have to know that is part of the cost of doing business. There is no safe space on the internet, and the idea of safe spaces anywhere is pretty stupid. So yeah, if you're going to do anything on the internet, if you're going to have any internet presence alone, you just have to have a thick skin. You just have to know that there are going to be trolls and very possibly not even real people that are just going to say nasty things to you and try to get under your skin. Like, it's, I think, been completely proven that there are straight up bots out there from like Russia and other countries just designed to get as many people, as many Americans perhaps particularly, upset. And once you start to scale up and have any level of followers on any kind of service, Facebook may be the only one that's slightly an exception there, because you should really only be friends with your actual friends on Facebook. But anytime you're saying anything socially, there's going to be a percentage of bots that are just going to try and get you upset. And if you can't handle what some random stranger whose opinion doesn't matter at all says on the internet, then you are woefully unequipped to survive in this world or survive an adult life. Andrew Murphy says, how's it going? It's going pretty good. Today I'm glad I'm not having network trouble after reinstalling OBS or trying to do a clean install of OBS as best as I can. So I'm hoping that I've finally fixed that problem, which has been bugging me for weeks now. But yeah, that's pretty much all that's been going on. I'm pre-recording the Halloween footage for October, and I definitely, I haven't said this, but I definitely am going to try to be a little bit more lenient on how scary games have to be in October. In the past, I've really wanted to try to find the scariest of the scariest games and cover them, but there actually aren't that many scary games to cover that I own right now. So I am thinking I'm going to be more lenient. A great example of that is like Wolfenstein: The Old Blood. Is a Wolfenstein spin-off game where you fight zombies, and it probably isn't going to be that spooky as far as a scary game compared to something like Agony would be scary, or some of the other deep horror games out there. The danger is if I continue to try to have Halloween months that are doing only super scary horror games, it's going to lend me towards buying more horror games than I actually would buy otherwise. It's going to lead me down that direction, not lend me. And I don't want to end up buying a whole bunch of horror games that I know I'm not going to enjoy in the first place. See, special summon this, and then this. Andrew says, just beat an opponent with my Lyrilusec deck, aka my midget anime bird people deck. Okay. I really still have not gotten anywhere as far as really being interested in deck building with Yu-Gi-Oh! I've just been so far behind as far as catching up, making pre-recorded footage, that I've never... I don't think I'm anywhere close to finding a point where I'm gonna try to make a new meta deck and try and improve. This meta deck that I'm currently playing is good enough to get me to platinum last month, so while I could make some slight improvements, making a total jump to a new deck, even just for fun, is probably more work than it's worth. And I definitely would say I'm not 100% sure that Yu-Gi-Oh! Really accounts for playing with multiple decks or different kinds of decks. It seems like it feels like it is very much tagged and tied into playing maybe a dozen or so meta decks, and that's it. That once Yu-Gi-Oh! If Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel ever introduces a kind of non-ranked better free play mode, and the daily quests then reflect that so you don't have to play in ranked, I could see going a lot more crazy with the decks. Just set this, I guess. That's literally all I can do is set that and then set that. Moving on with the video game news, the Steam Deck SSD has been downgraded on some models. The change affects the 256 and 512 gigabyte versions of the hand drives of the handheld. I guess this is an interesting question as to if you pre-ordered or registered a game. Did you pre-order or did you reserve? You reserved for like $5. You didn't pre-order. So the final product may be different, probably was in the agreement for that reservation, and you are buying it, I assume, under the new specs. While all Steam Deck 256 and 512 gigs initially came with a PCI Express 3.0 x 4 SSD, some now are shipping with a PCI Express x 2 SSD instead. I wonder if this is in part something that Valve is not even catching, I wouldn't be surprised if there are several fake chips inside the circuitry too, because of the kind of crazy amount of verification and oversight you have to do when you have any device built to scale. I'm sure there's a lot of devices that have fake chips in them and they just work just as well, and it's just cheap enough to replace them. But yeah, I guess this might be a great example of seeing that anytime there's a good piece of news put out, it often is to hide some other bad piece of news that they aren't releasing or telling people about. So they recently did say that they were going to double the number of deliveries for the Steam Deck. Almost certainly that article was pushed out for good PR to try and downplay or hide the fact that the memory speed is going to be half as fast in the storage. And that certainly could affect both, like, compatibility issues. If it will affect potentially compatibility issues, and it will affect the database as it stands, and that now you need a new category of a different version of the Steam Deck to retest all those games. It will definitely affect loading in shaders, loading in level data. That stuff isn't just going to be loaded from disk to RAM at the beginning of a playthrough for most games. And even if it is all loaded to RAM at the beginning of a playthrough, you're still going to have a initial slow load pace with a slower storage drive. All in all, part shortage or no, it's kind of fairly obvious that it was a bad idea for anybody to think about buying the Steam Deck in its first generation. Of course, some people have to buy it. A lot of people have to buy it to send Valve the message that this was worth their time and energy, but you as an individual consumer should not buy a first generation Steam Deck. The second generation Steam Deck will almost certainly be outside of a part shortage, or one would hope at least that's the case. And it will almost certainly be a better device, just a more polished, more thought out experience. Okay, that's quite the way to start on the first turn. I don't know if I needed to do all of that, but so we can activate this, and then we could put that with that. Not that that's going to change anything. I would just get that up to 3200. I guess it wasn't the God of War Ragnarok guy that was particularly complaining about... No, I think it was the God of War Ragnarok guy also complaining about being attacked. Ron Gilbert, who is probably a person who's too old to be on the internet in the first place, has said that he will no longer post about Monkey Island due to personal attacks. "Quote unquote, the joy of sharing has been driven from me." Yeah, it does seem odd that so many people seem to be upset with this new art style of Monkey Island. I really feel like it's just a vocal minority. Um, Personal attack comments. Like, this art style looks fine. And again, I feel like this is probably an older game developer who lived in a world before the internet and doesn't really disassociate the difference between somebody coming up on the street and saying something nasty versus a potential bot saying something nasty. And I think older people often do get more emotional than they want to admit, and just can't deal with the way the internet works, which the internet works badly, certainly, but that's how it works. Inherently, Ron Gilbert shouldn't have been online in the first place. He's too skilled of a person to be spending his time on Twitter, and this is probably true for a lot of people on Twitter. He should have had a agent, a publicist, a PR agent, somebody running his Twitter for him and censoring out all the nasty comments and then emailing him questions to respond to. Like, Twitter as a service, I think, kind of does fall apart around its general concept that you would have a direct connection with celebrities or semi-celebrities, or it just doesn't really work well that way. It works much better when there is a PR team in the middle, when there's some teenager that really understands all the memes and understands that haters are gonna hate no matter what. But yeah, Ron Gilbert should have been, for the longest time, working on games. He should be running his own business. He shouldn't be focused on hate messages on Twitter. The joy of sharing, like, yes, somebody out there always ruins all the fun of life. That is a sad statement that just does happen a lot. But that's pretty much the case in a lot of cases. I feel like a lot of people straight up just don't remember or recognize or haven't engaged with some of the stupidity that happens not connected to the internet or from the internet. Like, I guess there's just not that many people who have been in quilting circles or sewing circles where there's these tiny little in-fights or bowling leagues or bands. Yeah, bands is kind of a great example. Like, anyone who's been in a band almost certainly has had an experience where there's been somebody who's got too big of an ego, or the band breaks up, or there's just some craziness. I mean, you've got like the whole Ron Walters and Pig Floyd in the Wall, like, breakup there. You've got plenty of hugely successful bands where the egos cannot be in check, and where there's something said in nastiness. And very often those bands are on drugs, which I don't think drugs tend to lead to people fighting more. Most drugs tend to have people be a little bit more chill. Yeah, that's a stupid side point to make, though. My point is, I think we're almost getting this reverse nostalgia where people think the real world is so much better than the internet. and it just really isn't. And at a certain level, as a consumer, not to dive into the negativity and pile on, but you do have to ask, why didn't we get Monkey Island a year earlier? Is it because Ron Gilbert was on Twitter and not focusing on his job? Like, there's been a video game drought kind of for a year plus now. Had any game creator anywhere been a little bit less on Twitter and a little bit more focused on making games, they would have been able to finish the product a little bit earlier, I would think. At the end of the day, it's really not a story that you can react to, though. Like, nothing's going to change. It's somewhat sad, but you shouldn't be that sad with for Ron Gilbert, who's a highly successful game company owner. It's sad that we can't all be lovey-dovey and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but that's always been the case. Sure, you can certainly take personal inventory, and if you are one of the trolls, or if you've ever engaged in being just dogpong and hate trolling, to try to not do that again. But I think most people are not in that category. There might be some gamers out there that engage in kind of some banter, and the debate around whether banter is allowed or not in multiplayer games rages on. But so maybe you said some mean, heated words, had your own gamer moments while playing video games. Maybe then that would be something to reevaluate or think about, but yeah. Don't expect anything to change just because you change. Just be happy that you changed and that you improved. And in a lot of ways, I think kids probably do say mean things online just to test it out and find that they either like it or don't like it. Like, it's a silly thing to say, but I kind of think almost all kids probably should engage in at least one incident of bullying, just to realize that no, you shouldn't do this. Of course, that is going to encourage at least some small percentage of people to engage in bullying, and I guess you don't need to engage with it to comprehend why it would be bad, but there is definitely a case where parents, teachers say something is bad, like particularly when I was a kid, it was like smoking is bad, drugs are bad, and that really led to the vast majority of people being interested enough to at least smoke once or do drugs once. And sometimes you do have to just kind of make some mistakes and engage with things first, personally, before you can really feel the effects or understand the effects of something. Alright, we may have some success here. Nope. I am doomed. I do now understand why every single one of these link summon characters has to be in your hand. That does now start to make some sense. Moving on as we try to burn through the news. Oh, I changed the title on the YouTube Shorts, which Instagram, TikTok, or whatever, I'm not sure which one, maybe both, do seem like they're about to get banned in the United States, so hopping onto YouTube Shorts now probably isn't a terrible thought. But I changed the name from PC Game Daily to Daily PC Game, and by doing that today there were 3 views where I have pretty much gotten 0 views up until this point. So it does very much seem like the only thing that the YouTube algorithm really cares about or looks at is what's in the title. So I probably should engage in a higher level of like title development and cramming keywords into the title to get more views there. But at a certain level, I really don't want my channel to become 100% successful just because of YouTube Shorts. Because I'm not putting a lot of effort into them, and I'm not particularly proud of that content because I'm not really doing anything there. They're effectively incredibly short commercials. So yeah, but I did get 3 views, and 3 views is 3 views, so if that's what makes my channel succeed and that gets me monetized, and then that potentially led to me getting some like a livable wage in passive income, I will take that any day of the week. I really would like that to happen. I'd like to be able to have a lot more certainty as far as whether I could actually survive if I had to retire in the next 10 or 20 years. And I'm sure lots of people feel the same way. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Corey Barlog insists God of War Ragnarok release day is still on track for 2022. We're running out of time for 2022, of course. Nintendo says it can't realistically create sequels to every series fans request, but President Shuntaro Furukawa says the company is grateful for the expectations of its fans, which that is a very nice Japanese way of responding, and whereas you could easily also say these fans are harassing us for sequels, which at a certain level they are. I mean, absolutely, they totally are harassing Nintendo for sequels, because Nintendo has been incredibly bad about making sequels and really should have more sequels out there. Apparently, the story, I saw more details on it. The person that asked for an F-Zero sequel actually spent $40,000 to buy Nintendo shares, and I have to assume that they are either Japanese or live in Japan and could buy shares of Nintendo of Japan to go to the shareholder meeting to ask that one question. So I guess $40,000 is all it takes is to have enough shares to be allowed to ask a question. Although, honestly, you may not even need $40,000. You may be able to own even one share and go to a shareholder meeting in person and ask a question. Yeah. I think even one share probably does grant you the right to ask a question. But who knows how Japanese shareholding meetings really go. And I bet there's very few people that actually show up in person and ask questions. The vast majority of people that show up in shareholder meetings are portfolio holders or proxies, just trying to get numbers. As far as sequels go, This is not a terrible animation style for Star Fox. Is this based on a game? Has there been a newer Star Fox game that would have looked like this? At a certain point, you could pretty much make puppets that look like this, and then have all the cutscenes done with puppets, and that would be that would be just good enough. Of course, there is a problem with this statement too. It can realistically create sequels to every series the fan requests. It literally can do it. They just don't want to do it. Nintendo has ridiculous amounts of cash, and they could be constantly working on a sequel to every game that, regardless of whether they actually expect that game to sell a lot or come out. But yeah, it does not make sense for Nintendo to say that. It makes sense potentially for a suffering small company that doesn't have the funding to say that. It even kind of makes sense for Sega or Konami or Capcom, or Capcom would be a great one to say they can't make a sequel for every game they've ever made. Atari, the holding company that owns Atari now, so could easily say they can't afford to make a sequel for every game they make. Nintendo could, certainly. For every one that fans want, absolutely. Because you're really only talking about maybe 6 or 7 series. Make a Donkey Kong game, make a Mario game, make a Mario Kart sequel, Smash Brothers sequel, make a Star Fox game, make an F-Zero game, make a Wave Race game. They just released a Wii Sports game sequel. Yeah, there's definitely not a real long list there, because nobody's really saying too much. Make a Metroid sequel, make another Kirby game. Half of these games are already in development, so it would just be technically having on the books, having some intern somewhere work on a couple more games as just speculation projects. That's all you would need to do. Okay. Worst case scenario here, I'm going to end up having to destroy these 2 cards. Nope, didn't have to do that. It is definitely a case when I hear stories of Nintendo saying we can't possibly make a sequel for every game, when they really could make most of them. That is also probably a very Japanese way of saying, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. It's just a Japanese way of saying, no, we won't do that. Without directly saying no, because they don't want to say directly no. The more Western response to that kind of statement would be to say we're constantly reevaluating which games would be best to suit the audience and audience demand, and we appreciate your enthusiasm, and we never say anything is off the table. You definitely leave more of a door open for that. Whereas saying we can't possibly make every sequel everybody wants really is just saying no. So, if anything, we've gotten our confirmation as much as we're going to as far as there being an F-Zero sequel. see. Let's cancel that without even knowing what it is. Next we have a Video Games Chronicle article here. Quote, "We're terribly sorry. The heavily criticized 13 remake is getting a remake. The publisher Microids has hired a different studio to finish the development." Now, what's funny here is I think this might be the original game 13 and this might be the remake, so I mean, I just don't feel like there's going to be that much of a difference visually again. Like, they're gonna hire a different company to effectively try to fix what's already been done. They almost certainly aren't throwing everything out. Microids as a publisher, though, I don't think has ever been particularly good. There are a couple of companies like that are bringing back and making remakes, and they're just not quite to the level of quality that you would expect. And yeah, at a certain level, 13, I think they suspected would have been a less important game to the minds of their fans, and that they could have gotten away with that. And if anything, it probably just proves that you are not going to be able to get away with making low effort remakes anymore. At a certain level, too, I think the flat kind of comic booky art style in the original game is what people wanted for 13 in the first place. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a skin that gets rid of the remastered and goes back to that, and just maybe makes it a little less polygony and higher resolution. But if they are making a remake of a remake, then that also to me implies that they actually really want this to succeed. So this isn't just a cheap cash out, because if it was going to be just a cheap cash out, they wouldn't apologize. They wouldn't make a remake. There's been plenty of companies that put out terrible ports or remakes and then just gone quiet. So they probably were hoping that 13 would have revitalized a series and let them potentially make a sequel off the remake. And I definitely am saying the word remake too much. Okay. If I did this one, this is probably the best one to do. Then you put this in the graveyard and activate this. And then you put this in the graveyard and activate this. Take that. Go ahead and activate this one by tossing this. Then we can just summon this to activate this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Boy, do I wish I could script some of this. There's way too much gameplay for barely a high success ratio. We're approaching 2 hours, so this would be about the time to stop playing. I really don't know what happened now that it is becoming so blatantly obvious that I'm having to stop at about the 2-hour mark in every stream to just focus on news. It doesn't feel like there's been that much new news. It feels like maybe I'm just shifting around my focus to make sure I actually play Yu-Gi-Oh! Where perhaps previously I was just surrendering a lot more. That's probably the case, because we're actually trying to play ranked, and we're actually trying to win and not accidentally surrender. Moving on, Cuphead, the Delicious Last Course, debuts a new theme song featuring Mr. Chalice. If you want to check that out on Video Games Chronicle. Tango Gameworks is shutting down its mobile games after just 5 months. Players will no longer be able to purchase items in the game as of today. Which game was this? Hero Dice. The Japanese Bethesda studio led by Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami will shut down only after 5 months after release. So, Hero Dice is the name of the game, made by Tango Gameworks, which Tango Gameworks is the Japanese Bethesda studio. So Bethesda owns Tango Gameworks, so effectively Microsoft owns Tango Gameworks. And it was made by the creator of Resident Evil, Shinji Mikami, but that doesn't really mean much because he worked on Resident Evil and that was it. And it wasn't... Resident Evil, the 1, is not really the best Resident Evil. He also made The Evil Within 1 and then gave up on that. He seems like he does not have any loyalty to anything he makes. I don't think Microsoft wants to be in the mobile, in the Asian mobile market even. This probably also didn't sell very well because I don't recall ever even hearing about this. Or if I did, I paid very little attention to it. This might be the beginning, the first move on the chessboard as far as getting rid of companies and downsizing and streamlining all the acquisitions that have happened amongst Microsoft. Okay. If I summon this and then did this, and then if I were to do this and this, got it. Yeah, I imagine since it's 4th of July weekend, I might be a little bit less active. Although I'm not really planning to be less active. And frankly, for gamers, it's probably a great weekend to just stay inside and play video games. In the first day of the month, you're going to lose any daily quest you didn't finish. So you have to put a special focus, and it's a terrible system the way these daily timers work. You have to put more focus on making sure you get everything done on the last day of the month, and then you can pretty much always skip the first day of the month and the second day of the month, and you would be fine, and to just play on the third day of the month. And meanwhile, we have 59 days still to get up from level 79 to 100, which that'll almost certainly happen. And we are kind of getting to the point where it is probably just worth it every stream to do a 10 pack and a skip of legacy cards, because we are getting 10 packs of legacy cards quite often, and there's not likely going to be a point where it's worth the extra 10 minutes that you would have to go through the opening animations to open legacy packs when there's a new card expansion. And we're still getting a decent collection of new cards. Yeah, I think going forward we will probably just always open a 10 pack of legacy packs and work our way up. We're approaching the maximum again. Yeah, but yeah, as I was saying, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Microsoft cut the fat as far as Tango Gameworks mobile division. I wouldn't be surprised if Tango Gameworks stops being really under the oversight of Bethesda and becomes more treated like its own separate separate company under Microsoft, making Japanese horror games and focusing exclusively on trying to make Evil Within style horror games and nothing else. In a lot of ways, all of Tango Gameworks is around the fact that it is the creator of Resident Evil 1. And so if he leaves the company, I would think you would shut down the company completely at that point, and you probably wouldn't care too much. It is surprising that Bethesda doesn't just have their own horror company in the West, but yeah, I don't think they do. Moving on, now we'll just try and burn through the news quickly. Xbox has recorded another strong sales week in Japan. Series X and S almost outsold the PS5 for just the third time this console generation. It's probably not super surprising though that that if there's been shortages and if there's been strong sales one week, it would carry over to the next week. That's not crazy. It would be very weird. It'd be more weird if the Xbox sold a couple thousand one week and then sold one the next week, because that would just imply some accounting error. Let's see, July's free games with Amazon, quote free, with Amazon Prime Gaming has been revealed. Fail Seal, Maniac Mansion, Caesarean, and Fishing North Atlantic. Which, okay. Like, Maniac Mansion, this probably is the remake of Maniac Mansion, but it's still kind of a hard game to play. You really need a walkthrough, and I don't think the remake of Maniac Mansion fixed that issue. Samsung TVs now have Xbox, Stadia, and GeForce Now game streaming from today. Amazon Lua will join the platform in the future. Of course, I wonder if this is for all 2022 Samsung Smart TVs. The app doesn't require any additional hardware, which I guess the question there is what controller can you plug into it? Would it be just a Bluetooth Xbox controller, which is most Xbox controllers now? They used to not be Bluetooth, or a PlayStation Bluetooth controller? Or do you have to plug something in? There is also certainly a question, even though these are smart TVs that would just be streaming it, it may not be quite powerful enough, and it may be powerful enough now, but it may not be powerful enough in a year or two, or Samsung might abandon the whole idea too. It's an interesting idea, certainly. If you're buying a TV, potentially consider a Samsung TV for those extra features if you don't have a console. Because, yeah, that might be a nice middle ground for people that don't have space. That might be a nice middle ground for people that don't have a lot of money to buy a console and a TV at the same time. There is a danger, certainly, for parents there. If you don't want kids playing video games, but you do want them to have a TV, you probably don't want to give them a smart TV that can connect to streaming services. But yeah, that would be kind of a special case. Video Game Chronicles claims that it was planned to reveal God of War Ragnarok Special Editions today. But then they're also claiming the release date has been delayed at short notice. Who is this character? I haven't played God of War, so I have no idea who this character is supposed to be. But certainly this girl stands out compared to the boy and the Dad of War. And this is like a frost troll, I would assume, because he's blue. And there's like the head of I think, Loki, if you were to assume the horns. More and more, the Dad of War does not match. Even the background of this image does not really match the cold environment of the other screenshots. Moving on. Skate 4 pre-alpha footage shown off and playtesting announced. This is where you get ridiculous. Like, there's no such thing as pre-alpha, let alone pre-alpha. They and again, that's part of publishers' mistake, that they've built a culture of hype and expectations that just can never be satisfied. Car companies don't do this. Other companies don't do this. Like, if Ford says they're going to come out with a new F-150 in 2024, it comes out around 2024. Nobody harasses Ford because they didn't release the 2024 model earlier, even though they do release the next year's models kind of early in cars. But they make announcements and then they stick to it, and people have been trained to expect for things to come out in a reasonable amount of time. It's only video games that have always been so around the pretense of hype and so around the idea of games coming out quicker than they can. It takes 4 to 8 years to release a new game, and gamers are going to just have to recognize that, or they're going to have to accept shorter, smaller games. If you want that Telltale model, most people didn't really like that Telltale model. It became repetitive and it got worse and worse as they were constantly crunching to make more and more episodes for the Telltale games and never improving on the engine. So yeah, Telltale as a company proved that you need 4 to 8 years to make your next game, otherwise it's not going to be good. And that's not too far off from a book sequel. It's not too far off from a movie sequel. It's just the case. It is kind of a shame, I guess, if you ran the numbers, that you potentially are only going to see 10 sequels to a game, or closer, somewhere between 10 and 20 sequels to a game before you've become so old that you'll die of old age. But I mean, that is just life. Eventually it takes time to do things, and in a lot of ways that's some of the beauty of playing old games too, is that if there already are 10 sequels to a series, you can go back and play those sequels, and that'll take up a lot of time and keep you entertained. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says on Sunbreak's release day, Monster Hunter Rise has broken its Steam player record. Almost 200,000 players have logged in to play Capcom's new expansion. 200,000, not really a large number of players, even when you think exclusively to one platform as Steam. But it is a pretty big number when you recognize that it's a niche game and they're only talking about Steam sales. Monster Hunter Rise still seems like it is catching a lot of people's attention, whereas honestly, I'm still more interested in playing Monster Hunter World than moving on to Rise. But it probably, if I was ever to get around to it, it would make more sense just to play the most recent Monster Hunter game and try and work my way backwards if I actually enjoyed the most recent one. Moving on, Halo Infinite's campaign co-op will let every player make progress. We've heard this claim before. To a certain level, almost every game is trying to do that when it has co-op. But yeah, you have to get into the nitty-gritty as far as what progress they're really talking about, because sometimes some progress is counted and some progress isn't. Yeah, here's that article I was talking about. Treat developers with human decency and respect, quote. God of War director urges. Cory Barlog's statement was seconded by Xbox's Phil Spencer amid online abuse. So, yeah. Yeah, this may be the new narrative of the week that people try to jump on. Certainly is that developers should be treated with human decency and respect by the rabid fans and the bots on Twitter. Most definitely, this is not a statement that developers should be treated with human decency and respect as far as their employers treating their employees. Because it was just 2 days ago that we got a message from another Microsoft employee saying crunch is just part of Bethesda's culture, but we've got that. We don't have crunch anymore, and we've handled the whole harassment thing. And there has been a long history of companies like Activision Blizzard not treating people with human decency and respect. In fact, there's just a long history of employers everywhere in the world not treating their employees with human decency and respect. And I think employees would much prefer their boss treat them decently and respect them than they would care about a random person, a random bot on Twitter treating them decently and respectingly. And there's danger certainly using the phrase respect and using the phrase decency. It's hard. There's no quantifiable measurement there. So it's very easy for a narcissistic personality or a self-entitled personality to say they're not being treated decently and they're not being respected, when I think if you polled all of the world, they might very much be treated decently and respected. It's kind of hard to say that Cory Barlog, and I'm not suggesting dogpile on him or anything, but I mean, clearly he is a bit of a snowflake in pushing this narrative. But it's hard to say that he is not being treated overall in general with decency and respect when he probably has $1 million house and a fancy car and living in a very nice, successful state, probably Washington State, Richmond, Washington, I would suspect. But yeah, compare that to living into a trailer house, a trailer park in the middle of Arkansas, making minimum wage and less than 40 hours a week, being completely disrespected by your employee, your boss at some McDonald's, and having the customers at the McDonald's disrespect you. And that's a very different life experience, to take one example of what a lot of really poor people are treated like and what their day-to-day life is versus what Cory Barlog's life is or any game developer's life is. Like, it is from a position of privilege that you can have the time and energy to argue that you're not being treated well enough. Um, and I hate to say a phrase like check your privilege, but game developers really should check their privilege and check uh, their situation compared to how other people around the world or even around their own country are treated, and realize how well they have it. Not that everybody shouldn't at some level push for all boats and all tides to rise all boats, and that everybody probably should be treated better and more respectful, um, but it doesn't come off well when it is the rich upper class complaining about how they're being treated, uh, like, because it just falls on deaf ears, certainly. Moving on, because I don't want to get into that whole argument. Again, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has a special edition pre-orders being scalped for $300, which, I wonder if we are going to start getting back to seeing more of these scalping stories. I mean, it really doesn't mean anything, though. You buy a limited edition, or you pre-order a limited edition, and then you put it on eBay for a price, and then it doesn't sell, and then you keep that limited edition. That's pretty much what all these scalpers are going to do. Like, I doubt there's very many people at all that actually make profit from doing any of that. I think eBay is probably 95 to 99% people that think they'll make money and profit through some kind of scheme or scam, and actually don't make any money or profit, or they barely make enough through their scheming and scammings to justify their time. Switch Online's latest Mega Drive and Genesis updates adds Mega Man: The Wily Wars, which I think this is a game that's been kind of missing and hasn't had a re-release or remaster, or I guess this is just a re-release. Comic Zone is much more relevant, I would think, but amongst Mega Man fans, the Wily Wars probably are something. So, like, a surprise drop announcement probably is the better way to do something if you're going to release ports of old games, because you're not going to get like a ton of hype otherwise. The Wily Wars seems to be a collection of previous Mega Man games. And so that might explain why it hasn't been individually released, is because it is, each individual game have just been released. But there might be something slightly different in this port, in that version, that people like. But yeah, suffice it to say, all of those are just NES games, so you're not going to get a week's hype around announcing Comic Zone or anything in most people's minds. So a surprise launch of one game and then hype around another game probably is best of both worlds. It just, if Nintendo could always have 3 or 4 games coming out with every expansion pack, and one is a surprise extra game, that would work as good as it is going to work. It still doesn't work very well because Nintendo is charging way too much and not releasing the games fast enough for anybody's interest, and staggering it probably is the right move, but people aren't going to enjoy that. Moving on, Bandai Namco has partnered with the Pokemon Remake developer for an Ace Combat studio. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were created by the Tokyo-based studio ILCA, and so now they are going in a very different direction to make an Ace Combat game, which it'll be interesting to see if that succeeds. I don't know if people like the problem with the Brilliant Diamond and Shiny Pearl remakes is that they definitely were bought up mostly by kids. So I don't know if it was that hard of a remake to make in the first place, or if it was that good of a remake. Uh, Either it'd be kind of hard to tell. Uh, Definitely, we're having a theme today of just talking about remakes on top of remakes on top of remakes. Almost every piece of news talking about a game is more of a remake or a port. Let's see. Nintendo has also launched a subscription service for Switch repairs in Japan. It's called the Wide Care Service. It costs around $15 per year. It's Japanese only. It's probably unlikely that you would see something like this come to the West, just because in the United States the shipping costs are going to be a lot more. Plus, a lot of the things they're covering that they would repair are not things that are likely to happen. And in the West, at least, Joy-Con drift repair is already free and covered under the warranty. If anything, this is Nintendo being very greedy and making a bad product and now charging people for the privilege of owning your bad product that's easily damaged. And Nintendo knows better. Like, they've been making fairly tough mobile handheld game devices for a long time now, since the Game Boy. They know that these devices get dropped. They know screens get scratched, and yet they still very much made the Switch the way it was after getting rid of the like clamshell screen of the DS. The only reason the DS folds like the way it does is to protect the screens. They got rid of that. Now the fold and the hinge on the DS also would sometimes crack, which is an easier thing to fix than the screen. But yeah, with the Switch, they've just gone to a concept of having fairly easy to scratch screens and fairly easy to break cheap plastic parts, and they know better. They should have made better components with less plastic, made the device a little bit heavier, made the device a little bit more ruggedized. Now, arguably, I could say the same thing about the Switch, the Steam Deck, too. And we'll have to see, once people start actually playing with the Steam Deck, how quickly those start to get broken and scratched up. But also, Valve partnered with iFixit to try and help people fix their own Steam Decks if they get broken. Moving on, EA is being criticized for appearing to mock people who only like single-player games. The company backpedaled after criticism from fans and employees. EA has fans, I guess. That's probably the bigger bit of news. On Thursday, the FIFA and Battlefield publisher put its own spin on a popular meme by posting they're a 10, but they only like playing single-player games. The message, which was likely intended as a lighthearted joke, received overwhelmingly negative response with more than 7,000 replies. Jacksepticeye, with nearly 30 million subscribers, wrote they're a 10 but thought this tweet was a good idea. Are we going to get to see the meme? Let's see. She's a 10, but I haven't even seen this meme. She claps when the plane lands. Is this one? I've never even seen this meme before. Am I falling out of the meme culture? Possibly. It's not even a good meme. Yeah. Well, regardless, EA sucks. Like, what can we say We could say at every single stream that EA sucks, and every single stream it would be relative and not controversial. EA really is going to need some top-down management changes before it even has a chance of convincing players to really want to do business with them. And yet they have too much money. And it is unfortunate that in almost every economic system there really isn't a way to get rid or punish a company that has too much money and does something that nobody likes. Like, you can just be a dragon sitting on gold and survive for a very long time and do whatever you want and with no repercussions, as long as you're not blatantly breaking major laws. You can get away with it. It almost makes an argument for something like being able to sue somebody for being offensively rich, offensively anti-consumer. Like, theoretically, you can try as an individual to sue a company or try to sue, I guess, maybe the Federal Trade Commission to force them to sue EA, but I don't think that would really work either. It's the Federal Trade Commission that should be bringing lawsuits against a bunch of companies for being anti-competitive, and putting up a meme isn't big enough as a problem, but loot boxes in FIFA certainly is a big enough problem for there to be real investigations and real punishments. Moving on, Bethesda has offered jobs to the developers behind the Fallout London mod. The ambitious Fallout 4 mod was recently confirmed to be releasing in 2023. Bethesda hired the senior member of the mod team, but the project lead reportedly rejected the offer to work on the mod series. Which Bethesda definitely should be hiring the mod creators and that talent and that enthusiasm. And I think very quickly, though, they may find that the mod creators work differently than the way Bethesda works, and maybe the people at Bethesda should go, but I imagine the entrenched people would stay and the mod creators would go. That it's very dangerous, certainly, if you are a mod creator, to get hired and then let them pick your brain and then fire you after 6 months or a year. Particularly if you're just trying to hire them so that you can claim Fallout London or integrate Fallout London as an official Bethesda thing. But inherently, that is the danger of making a mod in general. But yeah, it's better to hire the fans and the mod makers than just let Fallout continue to get worse and worse. Let's see. Riders Republic and Skull and Bones in-game events will highlight climate issues. Ubisoft will use its games to tackle the issues of wildfires and resource exploitation, which I don't think that's a smart move, and that definitely feels like an unnatural story to cram into these two games, and that really isn't going to make a lot of sense. In a lot of ways, this is just the same old slacktivism that we see over and over again, where Ubisoft, who has plenty of money, could just be donating to real charities instead of spending energy and time to force players to be preached to try to get players to change their actions. Not that players really are going to have any control as far as resource manipulation or wildfires. Yes, you can certainly say only you can prevent firefighters and teach basic fire safety, but resource draining and manipulation, that's corporations, that's big business, that's governments. That's not the individual. There isn't a single individual on the planet that's got a oil well that is just sucking up oil out of the ground to such an extreme amount that it's hurting the entire rest of the world. Um, Moving on, Warzone update enables lootable perks on new Fortune's Keep map. Which, okay, I guess if you're playing Warzone, that's some news. Aspire has fixed the game-breaking Star Wars Knight of the Old Republic 2 bug on Switch. The latest game update addresses the top player reported issues. So they did put out a patch, but it's ridiculous to release a game that's not finishable, and it definitely highlights that they are not testing the games properly anymore to make sure they're even playable. I think we'd already talked about these visual novels coming to PS4 and Switch, not coming to PS5 though, it seems, as we look at the covers. And it still very much is a case where the reversible limited editions covers of these games seem to be kind of no holds barred as far as how much anime girl skin you can show, but then the amount of like leg or thigh that's being shown on the Switch is a little bit more than the zoomed in picture here on the PS4. Of course, in this instance, you might have done that specifically just for framing issues instead of for censorship issues. There is definitely a scenario where you could have put the logo directly over this midriff section that's barely showing, if you were trying to hide that, or you could have put the logo directly over the thighs if you were trying to hide that. We're now into the Gamatsu articles, or that was the Gamatsu articles too. Bunny Must Die Cecily? I don't know how you... Chelsea. Yeah. I guess I haven't read the word Chelsea in a long time. And The Seven Devils is coming to the Switch on July 21st. Which this is some kind of side-scrolling action game. Looking through the blur. Yep. Zoomed out side-scrolling platforming action game. At a certain point you might make an argument that this is kind of a Mega Man type game. It is surprising that Mega Man type games isn't just a category you would use to describe things. We had already talked about the trio of composers from Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope. Arcade Paradise launching August 11th on basically everything. Stranger in Paradise Final Fantasy Origin DLC trailer for Trials of the King has been announced, according to Gamatsu. Danganronpa S Ultimate Summer Camp is coming to the PS4, PC, iOS, and Android on July 21st. It's currently available on Switch. This is the side game, I think, of the Danganronpa series that was kind of exclusive to the Switch version of the Danganronpa trilogy being all sold together. I think it's the entire trilogy on Switch. So it seemed fairly obvious that this side game was going to eventually be ported back to all the other consoles, because it really wouldn't have made any sense for any content around Danganronpa to not end up back on PC and other consoles. Which, yeah, that's a good thing, but I would also kind of warn against spending too much money around Danganronpa, since it is just a kind of visual novel experience, even though this is actually more of a board game experience with visual novel elements, unless I'm thinking of a different Danganronpa game. Let's see what happens when we click on it. Yeah, you have this development board game, and a battle in a school store. Yeah, but it is definitely smarter to not spend the full price on that. Let's go through some of the games that came out on Steam very quickly. Pixel Survivors roguelike is nothing. Untitled survival game, just by the title we know is nothing. Indigo Loop. It's not visually polished enough for whatever kind of puzzle card game it is. So that's going to be a no. Here we have something called The Ghost Ship, which is probably a horror asset flip game. I guess the question really comes down to how desperate am I for some spotlights or YouTube shorts? Would I want to make a YouTube short around this game? Yep, I don't know. And that's going to create a situation here where I'm going to have to be a little bit more generous about leaving things up. But particularly in this case, I don't even know if this game deserves a follow, but I guess I need to be generous. I don't think I'm particularly in the most generous mood today. And so I think that would be what's affecting my choices here. So this is an explosion mini game. With some kind of visual novel twist to it. From the looks of it, it looks like there might be a twist here. Because, like, I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of like a Frog Fractions or something. Yeah, and that there's like some secret game inside of it. Let's see, Sycamore. Hidden level, collect all the coins. I'll give this a follow, I guess. Numia. This is another thing where I could do YouTube shorts around an RPG Maker type game like this. This one looks pretty decent even. But I don't think I'd ever spotlight an RPG Maker game. Heart of a Bird in a Cage. Looks like a Chinese visual novel coming soon. Yeah, we have one that's not in English and it's just a mobile port, so we can say no to that. Zal Survival. Every screenshot here is in a different ratio. So I'll give it a follow, but it's probably nothing. Track Race. Looks like nothing. Queen Ping Bookstore. As far as a non-English Chinese match 3 game with visual novel elements. Stream Toys. Not actually a game, so I'm going to say no to that. Classic 5 Memorial Game. Or Class 5 Memorial Game. Looks like a low effort Chinese garbage thing. I don't even want to call it a game. Ball Go Home looks like garbage. Ultimate Starfighter looks like it is just a widescreen version of Galaga. Which there might be something to that. But probably not. Dragon's Dilemma. Visual novel. We'll give it a follow. more and more as we start doing flawless cleanups, I'm gonna find that I have just added a whole bunch of garbage, and I'll end up removing 9 out of 10 of every games we look at during a flawless cleanup, just removing them very quickly. F122. This is one that should be spotlight. It's from EA and Codemasters. It is mixed in its reviews, but it definitely has relevancy. Jigsaw Servant. Looks like a pretty decent jigsaw puzzle game. I don't know if I really would want to engage with this, particularly at $14.99. It seems like it has a whole scoring system and everything. I want to see some feedback on this, so I'm going to put this on the follow list. Jigsaw Savant, not Servant. So Savant is like a genius. Was it the cat I saw? Doesn't look like anything. Do your stations. Doesn't look like anything. Homesick. Looks awful. Nights at the kitchen table. Looks awful. I definitely have to be really, really shallow when looking at all these games, because visuals are the quickest and easiest way to determine whether I'd actually want to play this. Whisper Books here actually doesn't look terrible. Does this actually support English? It claims to. We'll give it a follow and see what happens. Wanted Mounty Mole. Looks like a port for a very old game. Repels. Looks like a PlayStation 1 era game. And that does really put it in the mushy middle. Some kind of Russian MMO. We don't see a lot of Russian MMOs. Here we have a memory game. Here we have a top-down twin-stick shooter. Here we have another Asian-only Chinese game. This looks like this is girl-on-girl action in a Chinese game, and that's a little odd because that tends not to be considered acceptable. Although, in all fairness, it does seem like most of these Chinese games are getting put on the non-Chinese version of Steam because they're not getting approved on the Chinese version of Steam, or being approved and licensed to be sold in China in the first place. Five Knots at Floppa O. It seems like this is a parody of Five Nights at Freddy. Five Nights at Freddy. Dare to Stay. It's probably just an asset flip horror game. Yeah, more and more it will really come down to, I'm gonna have to put the fall list on. Put on the fall list a lot of asset flip horror games, as they've just now crossed the line to being so visually polished. In fact, arguably they're the only consistently visually polished style of games that are getting released on a day-to-day basis. Everything else seems pretty awful. We'll put Maelstrom. Maybe spotlight that. Yeah, I don't think this would be it. Yep. Inherently now I am having to evaluate these videos and these trailers more around whether they would look good as a YouTube spotlight or YouTube short. I'm gonna just consistently call them spotlights. on top of whether or not the games just look good or not. And so here's another one of these islands games that are just low effort asset flips that look very pretty, but they're the same game getting released over and over again. Pirate Souls doesn't look like anything. So yeah, I'm potentially spending twice the amount of energy looking at games than I was before. Because now I'm thinking, yeah, I'm looking for potentially 2 or 3 games that I can put on YouTube Spotlight and or YouTube Shorts, and if I don't find them, I guess I just won't find them, but I would like to try to stay fairly consistent as far as the daily aspect of calling it a daily PC game. Alright, let's go back to the Gematsu articles then. Zero Striker Gunvolt Trilogy is coming to the Xbox Series and Xbox One. Zero Striker Gunvolt 1 is available today. So the trilogy is coming as, I guess, separate games, not as a bundle, which there probably should be a better way of phrasing it. I guess collection would be the phrase you would use if it's going to be all bundled together. Yeah, we already talked about Hero Dice ending service on August 31st in Japan. The story-driven music game of Bird and Cage is now available for PS4 and Xbox One. This is a game I've just never heard of. Rated M. For mature. You see a girl running, bouncing into a guy. Bunch of fire. You can see there's a bunch of singing. So yeah, this definitely feels like this is a bunch of metal bands were stuck in COVID and they decided to try and make a music video using a video game instead of just a regular music video. Yeah, I feel like I've recognized. I remember them talking about this game, but then apparently it's just not done any advertisement since the original announcement. You have all these people, one of which was an ex Guns N' Roses member, and then one of which was an ex Evanescence member. Guns N' Roses, I think, still exist. I'm not sure Evanescence as a band still exists. Bands do tend to exist in some form or fashion long after the original founding members disappear. There might be something there. It was released on PC on May 21st. So here's it on Steam, and yeah, it is on the wish list. And the fact that it's on the wish list and I didn't even recognize it probably highlights how big the wish list is and how unmanageable the wish list is. Let's see. THQ Nordic and Powwow Entertainment announced Stuntfest World Tour for the PC Stuntfest World Tour. Which looks like it's a racing game, maybe with different types of vehicles on top of cars, in which you do stunts. Kind of more of a mature adult version of Hot Wheels, potentially. Aokana for Rhythms Across the Blue Extra 1 is coming to the Switch. This looks like a visual novel. Yeah, looks like a bright, cheery, possibly romance, possibly slice of life visual novel. I'd lean towards maybe more slice of life. Monster Sanctuary Forgotten World update is now available. Don't recognize Monster Sanctuary. Well, that definitely looks kind of like a Metroidvania type game more than anything else. It'd be interesting to know if whether these worlds and challenges are procedurally generated or not. This is being published by Team 17 also, so that probably gives an indication that Team 17 is not a particularly good publisher because they're not advertising anything. They have the Gamatsu has the sales numbers. Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes is new, taking the first space. 9-9 is in the 11th spot as being new. Also, Capcom Fighting Collection is in the 14th spot for the Switch. In fact, everything is for the Switch until you get to the 16th position with Capcom Fighting Collection, and then the Fighting Legends pack for Capcom. They don't even know what console that is, apparently. But yeah, 9-9 is way down here in the 25th position. Otherwise, AI the Summoning Files is new in the 20th position. Why is this in the 20th position and in the 29th position? I don't know. I think they mislabeled this, and this should be the PS4 version, not the Nintendo Switch version. As far as hardware, the PlayStation 5 sold 7,000 units, which is still 2,000 less than the Switch Lite, and Xbox still did pretty good, selling 4,500 800 units for the Series X, and then 4,000 for the Series S. If you were to combine these two, you would have 8,915 sales, beating the PlayStation 5, but not beating the PlayStation 5 Plus Digital Edition. And the PlayStation 4 only sold 14 units, so that's kind of ridiculous. What this potentially indicates is we are starting to see evidence that it isn't just that the PlayStation 5 is in shortage and it's hard to get hands on it in Japan. We're starting to see really just a lack of interest in the PlayStation in general. Moving on, there's a game called The Chant that has a story trailer, which I wish I had more time to really sit through all of these. A lot of these trailers feels somewhat like Life is Strange, but it could be a lot like the Quarry. Is this another one of those Mine of anthology horror games? Does not look terrible as a horror game. I really should start getting more of these anthology horror games, or these kinds of horror games, and then I wouldn't be in the I wouldn't be in the situation I'm in right now, where I really don't have enough of actually interesting horror narrative stories to play, and I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. At a point here, I'm going to end up playing like Resident Evil 4 and calling that a Halloween game, when an action game around shooting zombies is not really that scary. It doesn't seem like this game, The Chant, is from the same people doing the Dark Pictures anthology, though, so we're seeing more competition there. Kind of in a funny way, both the low effort horror games have gotten so pretty that it has pushed even the AA's and AAA game developers that are making horror games to make their games look fairly pretty. Which is good. We kind of wish that was the case for all kinds of games, that the level of quality just goes up and up and up while we can maintain, hopefully, the price and the cost of buying a game to stay the same, which that's probably not going to happen. We have a Redfall Welcome to Redfall trailer. I feel like we had already seen this, and Gamatsu may just be late to the party on this one, or this might be a slightly different trailer that shows you slightly different things. There is definitely a danger around Redfall in that it's going to come off as a Left 4 Dead but with vampires too much, when I think it may actually have a little bit more to offer than that. Moving on, One Piece Odyssey's developer diary, gameplay, combat, and more is available if you want to watch it. I think it's probably going to be a really long video. Nope, just 11 minutes. The problem with any One Piece game is you just have to hope that this is going to be the One Piece game that actually works and actually is good, because otherwise it's going to just be another disappointment. And at a certain level, I may be okay with a One Piece game that is just slightly above average or slightly above mediocre. But at a certain point too, I'd like one good One Piece game that could also try to, in some insane way, summarize the events of One Piece from the beginning. I know One Piece is the longest running manga / anime out there, so that's insane, but you could have brief snippets of saying, hey, during this arc this happened, so at least you know that much, or here's what the deal is with these characters from One Piece. A game called Sea of the Stars has been delayed to 2023. Sega's exploring an Atlas live-action TV and movie adaptations. Again, Atlas are working to bring these stories and worlds to life through new mediums and new audiences. So, I mean, that doesn't inherently mean it's going to be a Western creation, though. And certainly it would be weird if you were to try to make a Persona movie or Persona TV series, because you're going to need basically Japanese teenagers, and then you're going to get into the weirdness of at least one of the Japanese teenagers working as a prostitute, which they kind of censored out of that in one of the games, and yeah, I think it would come off very weird to do anything other than have a low budget Japanese adaptation. Otherwise you're going to have something like Netflix's One Piece, Netflix's Death Note movie, which was awful and everybody hated. Sega may not care. They may just be trying to get as much money as possible. But yeah, I don't think you tell the story of Persona well in live action or in TV and movie in general. I don't think you tell the story of Persona particularly well outside of video games at all, or probably have to explain the whole Shin Megami Tensei series first. Forged in Shadow Torch Physical Edition launches September 6th in the West, according to Gamatsu. Skate still working on it trailer and playtest registration has been opened if you want to check that out. Ruins Magus launches July 7th for the PC and Oculus Quest as a VR game, which every now and then we see one of these more anime style VR games that have the potential to look different. I don't know if they look good in VR that way, but it's such a narrow audience, it's weird. We already talked about the Sega Genesis Nintendo Switch Online expansion. And let's see, Bandai Namco and ILCA have established Bandai Namco Aces. This is a, I guess, production company to make a new Ace Combat game. And that brings me back to where we already were. So, then we're at GameDeveloper.com as far as articles. And we will potentially wrap up in 10 or 20 minutes. So we're not going to go super long. Unity is reportedly laying off hundreds of employees. Unity has apparently spent the 24 hours laying off employees. That's a shame, certainly. And it maybe signals the death of Unity, leaving only really the Unreal Engine as the main video game engine you would use to make video games. At a certain level, the Unreal Engine probably can handle anything Unity could do, but Unity tended to be maybe a little bit easier, and games made in Unity tended to be a little bit different visually in how they played. I think there's also a problem. A problem with Unity in the way they changed their license. They had a fairly competitive license with Unity where you didn't have to pay to license Unity at all until you sold like $1 million of profit, and then only on the profit over $1 million or 1,000 units. It was something like that for a brief time, and that was somewhat echoed previously with Unreal, and then they changed it so you just had to actually license it again. Let's see if we delve a little bit deeper and actually read articles. Layoffs were reportedly focused around the artificial intelligence and energy engineering divisions, which is the two departments you definitely don't want to lose employees unless they just had a glut of bad employees. And it's apparently still ongoing. Workers have described being pulled into one-on-one Zoom meetings with managers or human resource employees who then share the bad news. Unity is apparently promising to pay workers a month after the layoff and will offer further months of severance pay and Cobra Health beyond that. Workers are posting on Blind and speaking to Kotaku. What is Blind? I've never heard of that site. Workers posting on Blind and speaking to Kotaku. I guess Blind is a place where you can put anonymous posts. Expressed frustration at the recent comments from CEO John Riccitiello, who allegedly asserted that the company was not in any financial trouble and would not be laying off anyone anytime soon. Employee over the I don't even know what this means. Employee over the company's financial performance may have risen from challenges. Yeah, this sentence doesn't make any sense. Has risen with challenges of monetization products that they've previously disclosed would impact the 2022 financials. By contrast, the company did manage to beat revenue estimates in the fourth quarter. This might very well be another case where Unity as a company would have been better off as a private company instead of a public company. Unity hasn't made any public confirmations. Unity predicts a rough 2022 due to challenges. This was May 10th, 2022, with monetization products. Yeah, doesn't feel like there's much more information on this article. Yeah, I think Unity screwed the pooch, for lack of a better term, when they changed their monetization. Like, they desperately needed to get more people to want to program in the Unity engine and use that game middleware engine to make games, particularly mobile games. And I think they lost a lot, if not all, their ground to Unreal Engine or other engines, other in-house engines. Um, right now, if I was thinking about making a game, it would almost certainly be in the Unreal Engine, and I would have to just do some more research to see if you could port a game easily to Android phones and Apple phones also at the same time. And in most cases, I think it is a pipe dream to make a game that works and looks really good on PC and that really is a PC game first, and then port it to a mobile game and sell it on cell phones also. Um, I've yet to see that really succeed. Best case scenario I've seen is that there's been a few games that are mobile games first and then they're decent on PC. Diablo Immortal, which has all kinds of problems on top of its other problems, sounds like it runs pretty terribly on PC. Moving on, we already talked about Samsung launching the Gaming Hub streaming platform. A Joffrey Capital has nabbed a majority stake in Playtika for $2.2 billion. It's a venture capitalist buying a 25.73% stake in the mobile publisher. I recognize Playtika, I think, as a company, but I couldn't really tell you what game, if any, they've ever published. So I'll just leave it at that. A tactical multiplayer shooter Squad has cost $3 million in sales, so I guess that's a pretty big number, particularly for a game I don't even recognize. And you can't go a week without game developer having an Activision Blizzard article. Activision Blizzard workers share demands to end gender inequality at the company, which, okay, can you be more specific? It says specific demands to address alleged inequality. Let's see what they are. They had, earlier this year, they'd already settled a lawsuit, but there's another lawsuit still happening. Their specific demands are instituting a relationship between leaderships, the worker committee, and equal employment's operating coordinators, and allowing workers to sign off on any recommendations made by the coordinator. So, give the working committee more authority. It seems like more than anything. Or just include the equal employment opportunity coordinator, who I assume is not working, not an employee of Activision Blizzard. Change policy around human resources meetings to address a history of gross negligence. In response to accusations of abuse directly enacted by human resources. Yeah, human resources sucks in almost every company. It's like, oh yeah, you're supposed to be there to protect employees, you say? No, you're not. You're the wolf in sheep's clothing. An end to all mandatory arbitration, that'll never happen. Protection from retaliation, that'll never happen. Process to allow independent investigations, that's probably a decent one. The demand. Workplace improvements. You make these kinds of demands, and if you have any influence or any leverage, you might get half of these agreed upon, or halfway agreements on some of these. workplace improvements and protections for transgender and non-binary employees. Okay. Expanded parental leave and accommodations. Specifically, the committee is demanding that they be given 12 weeks of paid time off bound with their new baby without fear of losing position or compensation. Expanded lactation protection and support policies in response to substandard reports that lactation rooms have never been properly equipped and that breast milk has been stolen from lactation room fridges. Expanded protection for community managers, customer service representatives, and receptionists. Well, this isn't a list of crazy demands, really. I mean, maybe a couple of them are. I mean, they're not crazy demands. They're just things that Activision Blizzard will never give any ground on, and it seems like Activision Blizzard will not give any ground on anything. So, in this article, I have to side with the workers. They seem to be more focused, and maybe that is because unions like the CWA, which I'm slightly concerned that it is the CWA union in particular that seems to be the union that's going to manage to unionize all video game companies, if any union manages to do that. Like, I feel like it probably would have been better if a new union is formed with different focuses. It's a little weird to have the communication workers of America, which was telephone employees, shift away from telephone employees because all those jobs have long since disappeared, and now try to get their authority / claws into game developer industries just to make themselves potentially still relevant. It might be good, it might be bad. Like, inherently, every local union can be incredibly different from every other local union. So, a local 453 of CWA might be completely different than local 454. I am a little surprised that there isn't some kind of specialty refrigerator for offices for as much as food gets stolen / thrown out. And I think probably a lot of people get stuff stolen even on accident. People just not paying attention, grabbing things. But I mean, if there's a specific refrigerator for a lactation room, then you'd almost think that only a certain number of people would even be allowed in it, and that would be fairly controlled. But yeah, it does kind of feel like there should be a way that you could retrofit a like vending machine to be a refrigerator where you put in a key or code and food goes in and food comes out just from that one vending machine. Like, you could kind of see that potentially happening where a snack vending machine would be able to hold that, or that there would just be a lot of little cages in the refrigerator and only specific cages unlocked, which you could do that too, certainly. Have a bunch of fairly expensive electronic locks that spring open a cage, and only that cage in the refrigerator. And honestly, for any office, that's probably a smart idea, is just having locked sections. We already talked about this. Return to Monkey Island creator ceases blogging about the sequel after rampant fan abuse here. The problem with a claim like this often is that there's just no evidence around it. Yeah. But just not really seeing... Not really seeing a lot of comments. Yeah, it's just a claim of bad comments when really they should be naming and shaming anyone that's putting out bad comments. And you know, sunshine is the greatest disinfectant, and it when they make these um, when they make these claims of there being a lot of insulting comments, it really would be helpful to point that out. And certainly, this is why I'm not a real video games journalist, because I don't do any investigation myself. I just read news from other people, other news sources. Because I certainly could try to use the Wayback Machine and look at Ron Gilbert's Twitter feed and see the comments that are being posted. But certainly when you have GameDeveloper.com and you have Video Games Chronicles, and I think even Gamatsu mentioned it, maybe, all three of those news sources failed to even pick out one comment as an example. And I would want to see at least 3 to 5 comments, and even at that, if you're getting 7,000 comments and you can get 5 comments that are very negative, that's really not a lot. I would say you'd have to get closer to ratioed, like over 50% negative comments, before I'd start to really consider it a lot. But yeah, it's just bad reporting to not be able to highlight even one, and then you just believe all victims, I suppose, or believe anyone claiming to be a victim, even though they're not willing to show a single piece of evidence. I wish more news reporters would treat things more like a court case and actually get evidence and actually present evidence. But they don't, because they're lazy. Moving on, this is in part why I'm a little concerned about CWA being in charge as a union, because the labor union, the Communication Workers of America, have informed the Federal Trade Commission it will support Microsoft's purchase of Activision Blizzard, when they probably should put more of a pressure on them and say, no, we're going to not support them without more agreements and commitments. Although Microsoft has already kind of signed an agreement and commitment with the CWA, it doesn't seem like there was that much that they agreed to. Change of heart comes after the group signed a label neutrality agreement with Microsoft. But yeah, it doesn't really feel like the CWA played hardball, because there's definitely more commitments you really would want from Microsoft before you said okay to acquiring them. You would kind of demand Bobby Kotick go out. You demand that there be day one massive changes and improvements at Activision Blizzard. There is a danger here that the union just wants to be the union in a business that's going to have problems and need a union for decades going forward, instead of actually pushing towards improving the working conditions of the workers. There's definitely a danger of unions just trying to maintain themselves or have cushy positions for the union representatives and not really helping the average employee that they're supposed to be representing. And then, once again, we've already talked about this article, Republic Riders and Skullbones events highlighting climate issues. Okay, and then we have the Flawless Cleanup, Submerged Hidden Depths. He is rated very positively. And it's not VR, so that can go on the wish list. Unfortunately, the one thing with the new plugin I had to install to replace the other plugin, which I think I'm going to just constantly have to replace plugins um, to, to force clicks to open in the background and in a new tab. It does make it so when I'm going to do a follow list and want to add something to the wish list, I have to hit like control and then click to do it. So a control left click instead of just a left click. So I have to pull out my keyboard at the end of each follow list cleanup, but that's not too big of an issue. Submarine VR here. There are a couple other games quite somewhat like this. This has been in early access for a year, and it's VR. I think this can go. So we'll take that off the follow list. Subdivision Infinity is a space shoot 'em up game. Do I care about space shoot 'em up games? Not particularly. But I'll make an exception on this one because it is. No, I don't know. You know what? I'm just going to leave that one on the follow list and think about it for later. Stuffed here is early access from December 2021. I'll give this some more time too, although it doesn't really probably deserve it. Stuck in Time is the Loop Hero clone that's an idle game, and I'll put that on the wish list. This is definitely a game where you would want to more play it right after playing Loop Hero to compare the two. Here we have a game called Rave Horror. Is this VR? Nope. Psychedelic experience. Normally I would say anything that's mostly positive I'd say yes to, but I'm starting to wonder if I should raise my standards and only say yes to things that are on average over 80% or 75%. Yeah, I'll put this on the wish list. If anything, I'm just going to slowly move towards. Here's an adult game that we'll just take that off the screen because it's mixed. Yeah, it's a shame that it's mixed because this is kind of an old school 2D fighting game with some very ridiculous looking animated girls. I wouldn't even call them really anime, but it definitely feels like it's more of a troll joke game than an actual fighting game, and I think that's probably where it falls apart. So there is at least a couple of examples that are better than that. Then we had another game that has just completely been removed. There's that danger certainly that I'm going to end up with like 5 games on the follow list that have been removed. Street Strikers here is a beat 'em up game of no interest. Street Outlaws, winner takes all. Street Outlaws 2, winner takes all. It needs more time, or I could just remove it now. And then Street Hoop. I guess there's probably not enough relevancy here for this Data East game, arcade basketball game. But I'm going to leave it on the fall list to try and find a better example of that. It is kind of crazy that there isn't an NBA Jam type of game that people Yeah, you'd think that there would be something somebody had made that would be similar to NBA Jam, but that there really isn't anything and hasn't been for a while. All right, well, let me quickly wrap up this stream. Yeah, barring anything else. Um, let's see, there's a tweet here. Unity's leadership keeps screwing up. The only team making a game internally has been laid off. The engine's future is uncertain. No AAA or ambitious game using high dynamic HDRP has been released. Meanwhile, they bought Weta for 1.625 billion. Yep. So yeah, it does seem like Unity is being ruined. The code would still be there though, so but I guess the code will be useless if Unity as a company doesn't improve upon it for several years, and then went bankrupt, and then some other company bought the rights to the code of the Unity engine. Like at that point, it would be useless, and you might as well just start your own engine. In fact, they're laying off so many employees so fast that it would totally make sense for somebody to form a new company and have them work on a new engine, a new replacement to Unity. And the way the laws are, you might very easily be able to have a drop-in replacement to Unity where you could load your Unity file into this new engine and it would just work. GameDeveloper.com says Spain is set to restrict the use of loot boxes in video games, which, okay, that's probably good news. I wish the US would be more of a leader in that aspect, but rampant capitalism, late stage capitalism, wouldn't allow that. Apparently, there's a report that Bethesda employees won't receive Microsoft assistance for abortion related travel care, which, yep, that is still a big issue going on. Although it's kind of hard to even stick up with Roe versus Wade being overturned when there have been like 5 other rulings that seem to be based on no court cases at all. I mean, really feels like the Supreme Court should have to have a case that it's hearing before it just releases rulings. But yeah, that seems very, very weird that they can do that. I never understood them to be able to do that. But whatever. But yeah, they've released like 6 different other cases, and all of which are of controversial nature, giving control over more to the states and towards siding with more conservative, ultra conservative Republican desires. And in the middle of all of that, they did just appoint like the first female black Supreme Court justice, and it's kind of doesn't matter because it's not going to really change the balance of the scales. So unless they impeach 1, 2, or 3 of the existing right-wing Supreme Court justice, or they decide to go with the justice stacking plan to appoint more justices to change the balance, it doesn't seem like she's going to have any impact whatsoever. Okay, well, Twitter is broken for me, so there isn't anything new for me to see, and I imagine there isn't anything anyways. Okay, well, I didn't see any stuttering, so fingers crossed, maybe that fixed it, but also it usually takes at least a few days before, a few days of recording before I start to see stuttering. This Friday is oddly unique in that I'm not seeing any network droppings, network packets being dropped, but then again, maybe that is more to do with it being 4th of July, because it may just be that my ISP decided not to work on this Friday and on this weekend to change the settings and slow down the internet. Or maybe they gave it more bandwidth because they knew it was 4th of July. Who knows? Yeah. But yeah, otherwise everything seems to work. So that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and give me a game off my wish list. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.